2010. I'm also president of the School District Governance Association. And I'm sure there's other things I do that are related to this stuff also. I've been a proponent for school choice for a long time. This isn't about me though, this is about my husband, Ian Underwood, who'll be giving this talk tonight. And we're actually part of a new organization, right? That's the other one I'm involved in, the Coalition for Fairness in Education. We're carefully choosing the word fairness for the name of this organization. Which, Ian, are you going to talk about that a little? That's going to talk about fairness. I'm just going to talk about fairness. And this all came about because of the presentations that Andrew Valinsky has been doing around the state, talking about fairness in education funding, school funding. And we went to one of the first talks he did out in Newport, and I mean, it was just shocking. He didn't talk about achievement at all. Like, it's not about the children. It was just fascinating. So, go to the website. Ian's going to be posting the URL for that at some point or other during the talk. And the website is NH, right? It's schoolfundingshellgame.org. Yeah, schoolfundingshellgame.org. There's a lot of content up there about what is fair and how should funding be. Come on in. There's still some seats. I see them. And Cheryl, Cheryl, thank you so much for inviting me in to do this.
Oh, our pleasure.
And do you want to say anything about you want people to sign up? You probably know.
Yeah, well, we have our email sign-up sheet. If anybody wants to sign up for Northwood GOP emails, we meet the second Monday of every month at 7 p.m. right here.
Great. And I want to thank Skip for doing this at the last minute, for coming in and recording it. So it is being recorded, although are you going to post this anywhere? It's going to be posted, so watch what you say.
Or not.
Or not. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Ian.
If I swear, they won't put it on Facebook, right?
Yeah, right.
Hi. Thanks for having me. The title of the talk is School Funding, 3 Graphs and 2 Jokes. It's an extended...
Do you want the lights off or on?
Yeah, let's try that and see how this is.
Skip, let us know how that. You see the graph.
Can you see okay?
Oh, yeah.
Everything all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an extended version of some testimony that I gave down in Concord for one of the education committees. And feel free to ask questions. It'll keep you more involved. It'll be more fun for me. So we'll start with the first joke. A guy walks into a kitchen just in time to see his wife cut off the end of a roast and throw it away. And he's like, so why are you throwing away the end of the roast? And she says, I don't know, that's what my mom always did. And they say, well, why'd your mom do it? They call her up and say, Mom, why'd you always cut off the end of the roast? And she said, well, I don't know, that's what my mom always did. So they call up the grandmother and say, Grandma, why'd you always cut off the end of the roast? And she says, well, my roaster was too small. Okay, and I love this joke because to me it explains about 1/3 of all politics and about 90% of what happens with school policy. What are we going to do next year? Well, whatever we did this year. What do we do this year? Well, whatever we did last year, without stopping to really think about it. But the beauty of the joke is that it reminds us that it's important every once in a while to stop and ask, why are we doing what we're doing? Right? Are we actually solving a problem that we have? Do we still have that problem? Did we ever have that problem? Because maybe we didn't. And it's important, especially important, to ask that question when your solutions to your problem are bankrupting you, which is the situation we're in now. So with regards to school, if you stop and look at it, it turns out that schools are a solution to a problem of scarcity. If you live in a world where books are expensive, things like chalkboards and chalk and paper and pens and teachers are hard to find and expensive, it makes a lot of sense to send all the kids to one central place where they can share those things. In much the same way it used to make sense if you wanted to play a video game, nobody could afford, the whole console, so you would go to an arcade so you could share that thing. But that is not the world we live in, right? In the world we live in, you are surrounded by educational resources. If you have an internet connection, you have a smartphone or a laptop, You have instant access to everything that anybody has ever known. And more importantly, you have people lining up to teach you anything that you want to learn, often for free, just for the joy of teaching you. So we don't really have the problem anymore that schools solve. And so we can actually make a prediction. We can ask this question. We can say, if in general you take money and throw it at a solution to a problem you don't have, what should you expect to see? And you can make a prediction. You can say, well, we would expect to see the amount of money we spend go up, and we should expect to see the results we get not change, because we're not actually solving the problem that we have. And in fact, that's what we see. First graph. So this is from the Cato Institute, which is, you know, a conservative libertarian group, but this is using only the government's own data, their NAEP scores, their spending data. Okay? So it's not like this is cherry-picked data. And the interesting thing about this is these dollars, so what we see here is the amount spending. This is sort of the total over the lifetime of a student, K to 12. And here we see the NAEP scores. All right? And so in inflation-adjusted dollars, what we see is we've tripled spending, and this is since around 1970, and gotten no improvement in achievement, as measured by the people who claim to be trying to fix things. So what's interesting about that is it tells you that more money is not the answer, right? Just throwing more money at this thing, we tripled spending, got no value. It's not and this is over, right? This is a long time. This is a lot of data. This is generations of children. This is changes in pedagogy. This is multiple technological revolutions. Spending goes up, achievement stays flat, which, as I said, is exactly what we would expect. So that raises an interesting question. If more money isn't the answer, well, how much money is the answer? And that takes us to the second graph. So what are we looking at? This is on the, actually do have a laser pointer, right? On the vertical axis we have NAEP scores. This particular graph is for 4th grade reading, but it doesn't matter which test or which grade level you choose. They all look like this. And across here is the amount of money that states are spending per student per year.
Can I interrupt for a second? I'm sorry. Does everybody know what the NAEP test is? Do you want to? No?
You want to say?
They call it the nation's report card. It's a test that gets given to random selection of kids around the entire country in large school districts, small districts, states, and so on. And they combine scores together. No one kid takes the whole test. It's actually a very interesting test the way they do it. It's not a high stakes test. It doesn't say you're going to get into something or not. But it's just a statistical way to measure the reading levels, the math levels, and they've been recently doing science levels as well around the U.S. They then equate these scores to the international scores, where you've seen where we fall in the the international rankings. So it's just a way to look at how our country is doing.
Okay. And so you can see that spending is down around 5,000 to 6,000 up to 24,000. So that's a pretty wide range, and there's a fairly wide range of scores here. Although the interesting thing about the NAEP test is nobody really knows what a score means. Like you say, yeah, I got a score of 228. It's like, what does that mean? I don't know. As far as I can tell, nobody knows.
Well, except they've
defined.
Right.
I'll get to
talk about it.
Well, I will in a moment.
Okay. Right.
So, anyway, so there are 4 things that I would like you to pay attention to. One is, this is just almost a random scatter graph. There's no correlation here at all, and you could sort of demonstrate that by looking at, you look at this horizontal rectangle, and we see that there's a bunch of states here that are getting about the same scores, and they're spending wildly different amounts of money. Okay? And in this rectangle, we have states who are spending about the same amount of money and getting pretty much as much variation in scores as you can get. Okay? So money apparently has nothing to do, the amount of money you're spending apparently has nothing to do with the quality of the education that the kids are getting. Yes?
just to help me out, that's partly my eyes, I'm sure,
Mhm.
and the yellow wall
Yeah.
and the bumps and a few other things. I'm having trouble, just give me the two graph coordinates. So you got the horizontal is what?
Horizontal is the money spent
Okay, and what
per
what are the-
student per year.
And what are the amounts that, I can't.
So they go from around 5,000 to 6,000 up to around 24,000.
Okay.
So Alaska and New York are spending a ton of money.
Okay, how about the vertical?
So this is NAEP scores, which are going from 200 to about 230. Okay, and like I said, that
Okay.
it's sort of like the SAT score. It's like nobody
It's
really
a
knows what it
relative
means.
measure.
And that's out of 500, by the way, right? 500 is a theoretical maximum score. Nobody's even close to it. So the first two things to notice are money apparently has nothing to do with how well the kids are doing, okay? The third thing to notice is, so here's New Hampshire, here's Kentucky, here's New Jersey, and I marked those states. Kentucky and New Jersey, in Valinsky's presentations, he cites them specifically as states that have fixed the problem. But when I look at this, I cannot for the life of me figure out what problem they could have fixed where they would both represent a solution. The best part of the graph, though, is here's a red line across the top. This represents, as well as anybody can tell, what a passing score for a state would be. So it's interesting to notice that every state is failing. New Hampshire, although it's near the top of the heap, is only failing a little less badly than other states. So the takeaway from this, though, is basically how much money is the right amount? That's the wrong question. The answer doesn't even matter. And so the important thing to know about that is even the right answer to the wrong question is still the wrong answer. Okay? So this takes us to the third graph. So this, what are we looking at? This is spending. It goes from around 5,000 up to 20 something. These numbers up here are, you have all the districts in the state. They're not all showing up, obviously, but all the districts in the state, alphabetically sorted. And this is the amount of money that they're spending per student, per year. Okay?
Recently, what year?
Recently, I think 2016. All right. This is the same districts, same spending, adjusted for inflation. So these are directly comparable. This isn't just over 20 years. This is from 1998, just before Claremont. Okay, and so you look at this, and so one of the things that's being claimed is, well, Claremont didn't change anything. It's like, really? No, it changed quite a lot. On average, a district is now spending $10,000 more per student per year, and as we saw, getting nothing for it. To me, the most interesting thing about this graph is this red line, okay? Because except for one exception over here, which is Waterville Valley, which I think spends around $1 million per student or something.
It's a little exaggeration.
Yeah. With the exception of that, every district is now spending more than even the richest districts. And again, adjusted for inflation, every district is now a rich district. Okay? If money was the issue, if spending more money was the thing that was keeping kids from learning, we should all be doing fabulously by now. And yet, not so much. So, this is part of tonight's message is, this is the result of the last crusade that we had to reform school spending. You go to court, the court turns the Constitution upside down. They, basically say the right that it says exists doesn't exist. We'll invent a new right and a new responsibility, and we'll force the state to start making mandates and playing with tax structures, and this is the result, okay? Costs go way up, achievement stays the same. So the question that people really need to be asking themselves, I think, is, this is what the last crusade cost. What's the next one going to cost? Okay, and can we afford it? And I mean, to me, the answer is clearly no. Everybody has to decide for themselves. And this takes us to the second joke. So there's a guy, he's crawling around on the street under a lamppost, and he's looking around for something. The cop walks by, goes, what are you doing? He said, well, I lost my wallet, I'm looking for it. And the cop says, well, I'll help you look for it. So they look around, and after a while, the cop says, are you sure you lost it here? Because we're not finding it. He says, oh no, I lost it over in the park. And he's like, well, why are you looking here? And he says, because the light's better here. Okay? So here's the thing, focusing on achievement. If you want to really understand why some kids are learning, why some kids aren't learning in the same environment, what kinds of things kids actually need, what helps them learn better, what keeps them from learning. Those are hard and they're messy and they're uncomfortable because as you start to look at those issues, one of the things that happens is you find out that a lot of things you've been doing, basically cutting the end off a roast for generations, maybe you're actually doing more harm than good. And that creates a lot of emotional resistance. People don't want to change. On the other hand, money's easy. Spreadsheets, formulas, take money from those guys, give it to those guys. We know how to do that. We know how to tax and spend. That's a done deal. And so it's much more comfortable to focus on money. But here's the thing. And if you take one sentence away from tonight, you forget everything else, it's this. Money is the lamppost of education. Okay? By which I mean this guy is never going to find his wallet until he leaves the lamppost, right? He's got to get over to the park where the solutions are. It doesn't mean it'll be easy to find or he'll find it right away, but he sure as hell isn't going to find it here. Okay? And so, as long as we are focused on money, as long as every discussion about schools turns into a discussion about money, this is us. Okay? We're crawling around looking at something that doesn't make any difference, where the answers that we need are not going to be anywhere to be found. So, one of the things that Valinsky, his main slide at his presentations, at least when we went to, had a picture of a cracked chalkboard. And it was, supposed to tug at your heartstrings, bring tears to your eyes that these kids have to work with a cracked chalkboard. And what was interesting is there was a state rep there who stood up and said,
Kevin
yeah,
Verbal, let's just
Kevin
go with
Verbal.
him.
Okay, so Kevin Verbal was there, and he said, Abe Lincoln didn't even have a chalkboard. He had a shovel and some embers, some coals from his fire, and he taught himself to read and to be a lawyer. Okay, and so. The thing about that is, if money is not the issue, what is? And I will just, because people like solutions, not just problems, I'm going to say, I believe the problem is motivation, right? And what occurs to me is there are two questions that you almost never hear people ask when they're talking about education because they're so busy talking about money. That is, if you want to learn something, who can stop you? Especially now. Nobody. Okay, and if you don't want to learn something, can anybody make you? Is there any amount of money that you can spend on a kid to make him learn something he isn't interested in? Can you buy him enough stuff? Can you get him enough programs? You can't. Okay, so, however, I do want to, make a caveat there, which is, I'm not here to say I know what the answer is, because then that just sort of makes me like everybody else. My point in bringing this up is, we can't even have a discussion like this until we stop obsessing about money. Okay? That's the first condition. You have to be willing to walk away from the lamppost and get over there and say, maybe it's parental involvement. Maybe it's, maybe it's all about individual development. Who knows? But we're never going to find out as long as we're just worried about, well, who's paying what tax rate and what's fair in terms of money being spent. So, that's basically, I hope you go home, you remember money is the lamppost of education, and anytime you get into a discussion about education, if people start talking about money, what I'm hoping is you'll just be like, that's not the issue. Let's talk about the issue. Yes?
Has anybody measured, since the Valinsky case, the increase in cost for administration? By this I mean, we had, back when my children were in school, we had like 20 SAUs. Now it's over 100, I believe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think we're 99. We're the latest one.
yet our population is smaller now than it was then.
Right.
The other thing that comes to my mind is, I live in Deerfield. It's very easy to measure cost of students. I take out the high school tuition and the high school bus from the total budget. And then I take the rest of the money and I divide it by the number of students in the school. We're over $23,000 for an elementary student. We're at about $13,000 for our tuition students, which go to Concord High School.
Yeah.
So I take the thing called schooldigger.com and I go in and I look at the Deerfield students, where they fall in the state.
Mhm.
Last year, we were 180th out of 200 elementary schools.
Okay.
So we've gone from spending in the 90s a little over $5,000 per elementary student to spending over $23,000, and we're now down at 180th.
Yeah. Right. And so,
So
this
if
is,
you take, if you take money, it isn't what's doing it. But I'll tell you, back when I was very involved for years under special education, and we did a thing that said, in Harlem, they didn't know how to fix the schools. The kids were just failing.
Mhm.
So they decided to be innovative and let the parents choose which school they wanted their kids to go to from Harlem.
Mhm.
They went wherever the parents chose. From testing this year to the year they changed schools, they went up. Their scores went up.
Okay.
The only thing that changed was the parental involvement. The educational
Yes.
program in New York was the same for all the schools. But her parents, who had chosen the school, then made sure their children were going to succeed because they were responsible. They'd chosen the school.
Right, and and so that's an anecdote, and it's a great one. You would want to collect more data and see if that replicates itself anywhere else. But the point is, again, my point, maybe it's that, maybe it's motivation, who knows? You can't even have that discussion right now, because if you go to Concord right now, they're going to be asking, well, what should this tax rate be, and how come those guys are paying more than these guys, and are doing the income tax, and oh God, we were supposed to get all this money from Keno, and we didn't, so what, right? That is not even going to come up. It's not even going to be discussed because it's all about money. So yeah, I'm sort of making my point for you. Thank you. So I think we can ask. This is the, by the way, this is the original iShovel. It didn't have any connectivity or anything. So I think, when I think about things, I like to go back to first principles and questions like, so how did we become obsessed with money? How did that actually happen? And I think, this is my analysis, I think it has to do with a faulty idea that we have about fairness, okay? Fairness was the issue in the Claremont cases. We went and said, this is not fair. These kids in towns are being treated unfairly compared to those. And the thing about and that's actually the issue now, right? That's what they're talking about. Going around the state and encouraging people to go to Concord and talk about how it's unfair that towns are paying a higher rate, other towns are not. And the thing about fairness is, it's a very powerful word. It's a very powerful concept. It's one of the first things you learn to complain about as a kid, right? That's not fair. You got 3 cookies, I got 2. He got to stay up, I didn't. And they learn that because it works, right? People feel bad if somebody's being treated unfairly, and you feel like you have to act, you have to do something, right? And so it's a great choice if you're trying to get people to follow you somewhere, to raise this flag of fairness and say, follow me, we're going to make things fair, okay? And so my belief is nothing can change regarding education until the word fairness is reclaimed, so to speak. You need to take the concept of fairness in the context of education and actually make it mean something that takes us away from money and towards achievement. And until that happens, for lack of a better word, we're screwed. And so I think that if we can do this, and this is what I want to talk about now, this is a different concept of fairness. And I believe it's one that promises to give us better results in terms of student achievement and cost us a lot less money, right? Which is a different way. Everybody else is like, well, we need more money to get better results. I think we can actually spend less money to get better results. So this is a picture of the current way that we run schools. Okay? It's basically, students start out, you put them in for 12 years, you see what happens. Okay? Some of these kids are out here taking community college courses, learning to weld, or they're, taking, 6 AP courses. Some of these kids can't read. right? Or they can sort of sound out words, but they can't, you know, at the level where to read a paragraph, by the time they've gotten to the end, they don't remember what the beginning was, okay? And then after 12 years, we say, okay, to these kids, we say, okay, you know, thanks. Don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out. And to these kids, they're like, thank you for funding part of my college education, right? And the thing is, during this time, what we are spending on each of these kids is essentially the cost of a house. It's $180,000 on average, okay? Which is, you know, you talk about $15,000 a year, $20,000 a year, and you add it all up and you're like, maybe we should just buy him the house, you know? So this is grossly unfair to two groups of people, at least two groups. The first is the students who are not actually learning, who are being graduated, right? We have a 90% graduation rate, a 40% proficiency rate. So we're kicking out a lot of kids who actually haven't learned what they were supposed to learn. And this represents all the stuff that they didn't learn, that we paid for them to learn, but they didn't learn. And this represents the part that's unfair to taxpayers. Okay, this is stuff that's above and beyond what anybody would reasonably consider an adequate education. This is the Cadillac Ferrari part of education, right? The Porsche part. And so these two kinds of unfairness can actually be remedied by making one fundamental change to the way that we think about this, the way we actually run this. And that is, imagine a picture like this, where this is adequacy. And by adequacy, we mean, you know, well, we'll talk about what we might mean by that, but students who get there faster are done, right? If you've learned what you need to learn by age 17 or 16 or 12, why are we still paying for you? You know, just because that red triangle up there was basically them saying, well, you're telling me I have to be here till age 18, so you better give me something to do. Whereas we could just say, hey, you finished the race, you got to the finish line, thanks, see you later, go live your life, okay? And some students might take longer than 12 years. Maybe they take 13, maybe they take 14, right? So this is one of the, if suddenly you can boot these guys out, boot them out, it's impolite. If you can graduate these people more quickly, that's a lot less money that you're spending, okay? And, you know, if it turns out that the number shifted over this way is substantially larger than the number who shift this way, and there are lots of reasons to believe that it would be, then on the whole, right there, without doing anything else, changing no other changes, you've saved a bunch of money, right? So just by taking time out of the equation and starting to say, you know, if the point of this whole exercise, again, we can go back and say, why are we doing this? Not just why are we sending kids to school, but why are we educating? Why are you paying to educate his kids? Why am I paying to educate your kids? What's actually going on there? Well, if the point is for kids to be educated, then it makes absolutely no sense to say the measure of education is how long your butt's been in that seat. The measure of education has to be, did you get to where you were supposed to go, however long that took, okay? And if the point of taxing people to do this is that we're supposed to derive a benefit from an educated populace, that's the reason for doing it, right? That if you go and you say, well, why do we care? Why do we have to do this? And basically, you don't want to have a bunch of uneducated people in society, because that just ultimately turns out to be a disaster, right? So, in defining where this finish line is, you want to subsidize only those subjects that provide a clear public benefit, and not subjects that are basically private enrichment, right? People just saying, look, pay for my Ferrari in terms of education. And so that, you know, those are things like literacy and numeracy and rationality, being able to reason, being able to follow a scientific argument, being able to understand a statistical argument, right? Being able to have somebody present, say, this is why we should follow this policy, and you being able to look at that and say, well, that's a fallacy, and that's a fallacy, and this is just not true, right? That's what we want. And if that's what we're going to get, if that's the point of all this, then where we draw this line becomes crucial, okay? So what it comes down to for me is this: as a taxpayer, I benefit, right? The idea behind taxes is really that, people will cite this. There's a constitutional provision that says you may have to give up some of your rights in order to protect other rights. Okay, right. You will violate my right to property a little bit in order to protect my other rights, my right not to be surrounded by people who are illiterate, innumerate, and irrational, who are then going to create a society that, takes away my liberty and property. So it makes sense for me to pay for that, a little at least, right? On the other hand, which of my rights are protected when a kid can, after 3 years of Spanish, say, well, I could order from a menu in a Mexican restaurant if there's pictures on it, or who could maybe tell you the names of some characters of Shakespeare, or who can throw a fastball, or who can sew an apron, or that doesn't protect my rights at all. And so if the point is that I should be, in return for my taxes, I should be provided with a public benefit, there's no reason for me to pay for that. It's not that people shouldn't learn that stuff, it's all great stuff, but to subsidize it is wrong in this view of fairness. So this, I'm going to submit, is a better way to think about fairness, that we have a line, everybody gets to it, they start when they're ready, they take as long as they need, and everybody gets there, okay? And it's like, basically everybody gets the same education in their own time. What could be fairer than that? It's hard for me to even to think that there is something that could be fairer than that. And so this, to me, is a picture of a fair system, right? We've made a line. Adequacy, in this view, is the line between public benefit and private enrichment. It's where my benefit as a taxpayer stops and charity to you as a kid or a parent starts, okay? And we've changed the nature of this to show that this accelerates because there's an important point to be made, which apparently is missed in almost every conversation about how kids should be learning, and that is that as kids learn more and become more proficient at things like reading and reasoning and math, they should be doing more of the heavy lifting, okay? If you are spending as much to teach a 10th grader as you are to teach a 5th grader, then you are doing something terribly, terribly wrong. Because the 10th grader, most of the work is, here's the book, read it, let me know if you have questions, okay? Whereas the 5th grader, he's not there yet. You have to explain a lot of things to him and give him more help. So, we have this essentially eliminates this concept of a kid being left behind. It's sort of like now you think of it in terms of, well, here's 2 kids, and they're the same age, and one can walk and one can't. Is the one being left behind? No, he's not. He just hasn't got there yet, but everybody will get there. Everybody will get to the point where they can walk. Everybody will get to the point where they can talk, and, So, it doesn't even make sense to talk about being left behind, right? And that's essentially all we have to do to get rid of that concept is to give up what I think of as the astrology model of education, right? So, if you go to an astrological reader, a psychic, whatever, and he's reading your chart, he goes, oh, okay, based on when you were born, I can tell you that in the next month or so, something's going to happen to you. And you'd laugh at that, right? But if some educators get together and say, oh, based on the day you were born, I can tell you that this month you should be learning about the Pythagorean theorem and the pharaohs of Egypt, why are we not laughing at that? Why is that not hysterically funny? Because that's actually what happens, okay? And nobody seems to care or realize because we're too busy talking about money, okay? So if this is the picture of education, right? It's almost ridiculous to think that anybody, if the kind of education that I'll be talking about, that it's ridiculous to think it should take 12 years, and it's ridiculous to think that it should cost $180,000 or $200,000, okay? And if this is the picture of education, then fighting over things like property tax rates is almost pointless, because it's just not going to be that much money involved. So there are, I've touched on this already, there are immense financial benefits to be had here, which is around 4th grade when kids start learning to read well enough to absorb content. They're not just sounding things out, they're actually learning to be able to read something, understand it, and learn from it. From there, down to about a 10th grade reading level, say, the cost of educating a kid drops, or should drop, to about 0, right? Especially now that textbooks aren't expensive. You want to know something that they teach at Yale? It's all online. You want to know something they teach at MIT? It's all online, okay? There is nothing that you have to pay a lot of money in an academic sense to learn right now. And you, if you have learned to read, every time you get a little better at that, you can take on more and more of that responsibility, right? And the fact that this is not what this curve looks like right now is, I think, just one of the most crushing indictments of the current system. I think it's just beyond me. So in addition to financial benefits, though, there are political benefits, right? So if a student has learned to, he's learned logic and rhetoric, so he's learned how to persuade people. And he's learned how people will try to persuade him, right? Which kinds of things they'll tell him, how they'll tug on his emotions, how they'll tell him things that are irrelevant just because it'll, distract him. And if he can detect the kind of common fallacies that people fall for all the time, right? He'll be less susceptible to specious arguments, okay? He'll be less susceptible to things like statistical chicanery, oh look, or false projections. He'll be less susceptible to things like half-truths and outright lies. And in short, he'll be a citizen rather than a subject, okay? Which is really, that's the point of all this, right? The point of all this is to have educated citizens. And if we're not going to do that, if we're going to fail at that goal, it almost doesn't matter what else we think we're succeeding at, okay? This is really, this kind of thing, this kind of education is really the only justification that we have for taking people's money and using it to educate other people's kids. And if we're not going to be doing that, we should just give up. So, if fairness in education means that everyone gets the same education, not the same nice equipment, not the same school, not the same amount of money, not the same tax rate, but they get the same education, however long that takes, wherever they start where they start, they finish when they're done, when they've had enough, they get whatever help they need. So if fairness means that, and fairness means that fairness to students means that, and fairness to taxpayers means that they subsidize a public benefit but not private enrichment, it raises a very natural question, which is how do we differentiate between those two, right? How do we define adequacy? And I think that this definition of fairness leads directly to an interesting, a useful and helpful definition of adequacy that we can use, which is good timing because this is one of the things that Valinsky is down there telling people. It's been 20 years since the courts and the legislators sat down and said, what's an adequate education? It's time to redefine that. I wholeheartedly agree. It's time to redefine that. So, again, we have this line that we want to call adequacy, and we have to say, well, where is this line? When do we cross it, right? So there are classical solutions, and it's sort of fun. These are this classical liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, the quadrivium, number, geometry, music, and cosmology. This is really what, when people talk about a classic liberal arts education, this is actually what they mean. Okay? And there are some things to be said for this, right? Sometimes, I like to say, sometimes the way forward is back. But there are some problems with this, right? It's very easy to characterize it as old-fashioned. It's very easy to say, well, that's just arbitrary. Why are those things important and the things I like not important? Okay, and those are fair criticisms. So, I would like to go back and talk about the three things that I, as a taxpayer, am paying to avoid. Okay, I do not want to be surrounded by people who are illiterate, innumerate, or irrational. That's what I'm paying for. That's why you're taking my money. That's what you're protecting me against, okay? Just like you protect me against criminals. This is what you're protecting me against. And so we can look at the subjects in the trivium, right? Grammar, yeah, grammar really does help protect you against illiteracy. If you don't understand grammar, then you're severely handicapped in trying to read or write. Logic protects you against irrationality. Rhetoric does both of those. Rhetoric being essentially the art of persuasion, right? The use of language to change people's minds. So we are all subject to that. And not understanding rhetoric is a little like being the guy who goes to Vegas and sits down at the poker table and doesn't understand the rules. There is no way you're going to win that game. Okay? And the game of modern society is largely people trying to convince you of stuff so they can, get them to give you get you to give them something, often your freedom or your money. Number, by definition, understanding numbers and how math works would protect you against numeracy. Something like geometry, I put this as a maybe because it depends on what you think of as geometry. There's a certain amount of that just shows up when you study numbers and arithmetic because you use basic geometric concepts to actually learn those things. If they mean that you should go through all the books of Euclid, there are some people who would think that's a good idea. There are some people who would think, you know what, if you've taken separate logic courses, then that's just an application of that. So, just saying, it's still an open question. Music, cosmology, if one of you doesn't know how to play an instrument, if one of you isn't familiar with the latest theories of how the universe was formed, am I in any way harmed? I am not. So, right now, basically things that are in green are things that are worth subsidizing, things that are in red, not so much. So that's the trivium and the quadrivium. So if we apply the same thing to what we might think of as, more modern subjects, right? Reading, writing, rhetoric, logic, those are protecting me. If everybody has to learn those things, then I am protected. My rights are protected. Algebra, arithmetic, algebra, statistics. Statistics is sort of, I think, necessary for innumeracy. We might also put a yes over here in irrationality. Just because so much of modern argumentation depends on statistics. Oh, well, 94% of people, do this, or 50% of the time this happens. So clearly, you need to get that far. Calculus? Maybe. You could argue that understanding calculus is an important thing. On the other hand, as a math educator, I can also explain to you that I can teach you as much as you need to know about calculus, if you're not going to be an engineer, in about an hour. So it's not clear you need to have a course in that. Geometry I left there. So civics and history, I'll say why in a moment, why I'm putting those as a maybe, right? Maybe they help you to be less irrational, right? That the people who haven't studied history are condemned to repeat it, right? And there is a huge push now with civics. There's a lot of people talking about how, kids are growing up, they don't understand how government works, they don't understand the Constitution. We need to have this in our schools. Okay? French, am I harmed? People can't speak French around me? Not so much. Music, art, welding, programming. These are job training. Okay? These are not part of a fundamental education. These are things you do with your education once you have it. Okay? So, there are these subjects where there's going to be some disagreement. There's always going to be some disagreement. And so for those, I am proposing, these are like 3 criteria, I'm going to call them 3 criteria, and I'm going to propose 2 tie-breaking commandments. The first one is only mandatory subjects, right? If something is not essential enough, it's not important enough that everybody needs to know it to protect my rights, it shouldn't be subsidized. It's extra. It's beyond adequate. Okay? So that would rule out calculus, right? Not everybody needs to take calculus. And so while it's a nice thing, and there are certainly lots of people who should learn it, who need to learn it, it's not important enough for everybody to learn it. So as a taxpayer, it's fair to me if I'm not paying for that. The second one is no politics. If there's enough disagreement about teaching something that people are really fighting over it, then by definition, it's political. And the last thing that should be political in a society, the last 2 things would be religion and school. Okay? For much the same reason. They're too important, they're too personal. Nobody should have that kind of control over anybody else. And so, that's the thing that would take civics out of the running. Okay, and people would say, well, everybody needs to know civics, and there would be a substantial number of people, including myself, who would say, really? Do you really want public schools teaching civics? Do you want them saying things like, well, the First Amendment says that you can say whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody's feelings? Do you really want them saying things like, well, the Second Amendment protects the right of the power of a state to have a National Guard? Do you really want that happening? I don't. What I want happening is I want a bunch of kids who know how to read and how to reason and how to logically evaluate an argument and spot a fallacy, and then I can give them, here's the federal Constitution, here's the state Constitution, here's the Federalist Papers, here's the Anti-Federalist Papers. Read it, make up your own mind. Okay? So, only mandatory subjects, no politics, right? And so our table then looks like this. Even though those are babies, this no takes them out of the running. They are not important enough to be mandatory. And civics and history are political, almost by definition. Anybody who's teaching history is leaving some things in and taking some things out and putting a spin on it, okay? And the way that, say, a course in World War II would get taught, depending on which teacher you've got and which textbooks they're using, could be 180 degrees apart, okay? So this is my framework, right? 3 criteria, 2 commandments for deciding not what people should learn, because people should learn whatever they want to learn, and they should learn lots of different things. Not for what they should learn, but what should be subsidized. Okay, what is important enough to taxpayers, and what is focused enough that we could make sure actually that every kid is essentially getting the same education, no matter where they live, no matter who the parents are, right? You get through, a certain reading level. You have to demonstrate proficiency. Basically, people talk about like, oh my God, we'll have to test them, and they'll be able to teach the test. And I'm like, great. I'm going to give you 100, or say 10 out of 100 randomly selected papers where they're trying to jerk you around and make you believe something that isn't true. And I want you to tell me how they're doing it. Teach to that test. I dare you. Okay? So if this is, this is, essentially defining fairness to mean everybody reaches a well-defined stop at the finish line, and then they stop. And this directly addresses the biggest issues that we're facing, right? Forgetting money for a moment, which is the lack of proficiency. You've got these kids who are there for 12 years, they come out, they have no idea what's going on, they really can't, you give them stuff like, you're at McDonald's and something's, $3.61, you give them $5.11, and they're like a deer in the headlights, right? Or you go to, I guess there was a woman at one of Valinsky's presentations who stood up and said, I don't think it's fair that my kid doesn't get a laptop like the kid in the next town because they were lucky enough to have a glacier land in their town. Okay, and you think about a statement like that, you don't even know where to start, right? But these are the kinds of people that we have got, have been coming out of the system that we've had, which is park your butt there for 12 years and good luck, okay? And we can't afford that. You can't afford to have people who exhibit that kind of reasoning power going out and electing people to run your life. It just isn't acceptable, okay? And that, in the end, it destroys your rights. So, lack of proficiency, this directly addresses it. This idea that, this conflation of public benefit with private enrichment, it directly addresses that. It actually would force us to deal with something nobody ever wants to talk about, which is the entanglement between education and daycare, right? Because as soon as time's out of the equation and kids can be learning anywhere at any time, suddenly this idea of warehousing them for the convenience of their parents becomes much harder to defend. And of course, somebody will go back to the Supreme Court and they'll find that somehow in the Constitution there's an article where there's state responsibility to provide daycare. But make them do it. Don't just give in. So, on the other hand, definitions of fairness that deal with money, with tax rates, those things are only indirect. You change this and you hope that there will be some indirect effect. And, as I hope I showed convincingly, decades of experience have shown us that doesn't work. That fails. So we know it won't work. I mean, we could, it's almost to the point where we could take the extra money out in the street, burn it, and dance around it, praying for improvement. And we'd have this advantage. At least we don't know that that doesn't work. Okay? So, there's a design constraint that a lot of people hear it, and I really like it, is that a product, like a car or a tool or something, should have everything you need and nothing you don't. And that's what I'm arguing for here. What do we need and what do we not need, right? So there's Antoine Saint-Exupéry, probably mispronouncing his name, but he said that perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing else to take away, right? And so right now, I think of this as sort of a representation of the modern method of deciding what should be subsidized. You just keep asking, well, would this be useful maybe? Would somebody like this? Could this help us out? I don't know. And you just keep adding stuff in, and you just keep asking, do we have enough yet? Do we have enough yet? And the problem is, when that involves wealth transfer, the answer to do we have enough yet is never yes. There's always something else you could pile on, right? And so, I look at this and I think somebody could sneak into the museum where this is displayed and they could slop some more stuff on that. And the next day, who would know? Right? What could be added to this, really, and still change its nature? Okay? On the other hand, Statue of David, what could you take away from there? Anything you took away would lessen it. Okay? And so, I just want to leave these pictures in your head and this idea that what we really ought to be doing when we're looking at adequacy is we ought to be chiseling that out of stone rather than slapping on clay. Okay? Those are two fundamentally different approaches, and they lead in fundamentally different directions. So I know what everybody's thinking. They're thinking, oh my God, but aren't we going to have a bunch of kids who don't know anything? Right? Okay, well, first of all, we have this now, right? Like I said, people can't be changed, people who, will tell you that the two-party system is somehow enshrined in the Constitution. Just there's no end to the misinformation that people have. And, as I think it was either Will Rogers or Mark Twain, or who knows, who said, it's not really the things you don't know that get you in trouble, it's the things you know for sure that just aren't true. Okay, and that's what we have now. It's not just that people don't know things, it's that people know all kinds of things that are completely false. Okay? And so instead, what I believe we would end up with is a bunch of kids who can learn anything. Especially given that the world they live in, and if you give them the skills that they need to teach themselves, then you have discharged your duty, right? And I love this quotation from William Butler Yeats. Education is not the filling of a pail, it's the lighting of a fire. You are getting them started. You are not finishing. The idea that they get through the 12 years is like, okay, your education's done, right? I tried to find this quotation, I couldn't. I thought Mark Twain said it, but at one point he was telling somebody, he wrote a letter to a young person, said, now that you're out of school, your education can begin, right? And that's, I think, the picture that we're looking for. Here's a kid who has the whole world, and people, like I said, not just the information there in books, on the internet, people who, one of the amazing things that's come out of technology is how willing people are to help each other learn stuff, right? It's just phenomenal. We live on a farm, and we're all from the suburbs. Well, she's from Brooklyn, which I guess is a suburb. It used to be hundreds of years ago. Anyway, we moved there and we're like, we don't know how to kill a chicken. We don't know how to raise a pig. We don't know how to do any of this stuff. And here's YouTube. Oh, okay. We just got sheep, and we had to, it's like, okay, how do you actually skin a sheep? It's like, I don't know. Hey, look, there's YouTube, right? You want to learn to play the ukulele. You want to actually, if I want to learn multivariate calculus, anything I want to learn. There's people out there just going, please, please, let me teach you this, okay? That's the world we live in today. And to prepare somebody to live in that world, it's not to fill their brain with, here's the facts that you'll need to know. We have no idea what facts they're going to need. We have no idea what skills they're going to need. Here's what we do know. We do know that they're actually going to be able to have to read, write, and reason in order to make use of everything that they're surrounded by.
But not cursive.
Right, cursive. That is the kind of discussion you want to have, right? So, we won't have that discussion as long as we're just talking about money. So, and if we're lucky and we do this right, these kids may actually be able to go back and teach their parents. And wouldn't that be awesome? So, just to recap all this, money is not the issue, okay? And as long as we keep thinking that money is the issue, we are never going to leave the lamppost. We're never going to get over into the park. We're never going to find a wall, okay? Just to beat that metaphor to death. Fairness should be about offering everyone the same education.
senator for you.
So fairness should be about offering everyone the same education, not the same amount of money, not the same time in a seat, not the same kind of pretty building, but the same result, okay? No more and no less, no matter where they live, who their parents are, what their situation is, right? And taxpayers should be subsidizing public benefits and not private enrichment. And this change creates a framework, right? These three criteria, the two commandments, they give us a principled way to actually decide what adequacy means, which will move us closer to our goal, the goal we all claim we want, which is an educated citizenry. And it should actually raise achievement while lowering spending. What an idea, okay? So, what do I want you guys to do? Well, apart from tar and feathering some people, we have a website, schoolfundingshellgame.org, and there are a bunch of short pieces here, right? Each one has a picture, a caption, and a few paragraphs. They're very quick to read, they're very easy. And we're trying to use humor to make very, very serious points. And so, there's a bunch of them, and there's more all the time. And one of the things that we would love you to do is go and look at those. Right? And if any of them resonate with you, if you think, oh my God, that's right, that's what I think, share them, okay? And by share them, I mean you could print them out and send them to your representatives. You could share them with your friends on social media. Or if you want, if you'd like to go down and express your support or opposition to something in Concord and you can't think of what to say, print one out, take it with you and read it. It'll take you 30 seconds. And these are the kinds of things the people you'll be talking to can't hear enough from enough people. Okay, it's not the kind of thing they'll sink in the first time. They need to know that a lot of people believe this stuff. And so again, the bottom line is this. I honestly believe, and this is why we are the Coalition for Fairness in Education, I think that unless we change the definition of fairness and remove the focus of fairness from money, then if we don't do that, we are going to keep doing what we've been doing, and we're going to keep getting what we've been getting. School funding reform lemmings. So that's it. Thank you. Yeah.
Internationally, where do we fall as far as per pupil spending? And is there any other countries that have models similar to what you're advocating for?
You might know more about that than me.
You know what? I've seen some things, and we spend way more per kid than anybody else, as far as I can tell.
Except Luxembourg.
Here we go. Okay, somebody
So I
has
looked that up. So the only country, which is a small little tiny country, that spends more than us is Luxembourg.
Wow.
But, so my answer to that would be, money isn't the issue.
Well, how about with teaching towards the goal of adequacy in order to save resources or to better allocate resources? Are any other countries doing that?
I don't actually know. I mean, it'd be an interesting thing to look into. But
Finland
Finland?
is supposedly one of the tops in the world, and they don't start their children until 7 years of age.
Huh.
Okay, it's mandatory. Well, it's not. They do not require preschool, kindergarten. You don't start any form of formal education until you're 7, and then they're supposedly been the tops for quite some time.
Right, so a couple of things. One, just like New Hampshire is near the top, but still not doing that well. Being near the top is sort of like having the smallest tumor.
Well, they've been at the top according to the
Right.
NAEP scores.
The internet, the TIMS, that's right.
Yes.
I mean, I think they do something else. They made a huge change in how they train teachers.
Yes.
They made a huge bar to get accepted to a teaching college.
Are you talking where?
In Finland.
So Finland is a very interesting study. Number one, Finland teachers come out of the top 10% of the graduating college students.
The teachers.
And
are
the teachers
top
come from the
10%.
top 10% of the graduating students. That is not so or anywhere near
Near
so
so.
in the United States.
That's right.
They're also paid, as should be, very well.
Well,
You know, and that's one of the things that
They earn
teachers
it.
like to bring up, that they make a lot of money, but they're the best of the best
Yeah.
coming out of college.
Right.
And they also don't just put the teachers' college. They accept people that have studied in other areas
Yes.
of study.
Sure. But are they doing anything that's fundamentally different than just, okay, you go and you're there for a certain amount of time?
Well,
do
they
do
do-
kids
they do
graduate
have-
early? example.
I don't know for sure, but I did hear, and when you was talking about paying for seat time, I think
Mhm.
that, you know, that they have to, 180 days makes an education. Well, they don't think that in terms of that, they go through and they do different modules or whatever, but they don't
Mhm.
require that they sit in a seat for 180 days.
Okay.
so then another example is Korea, who's also up there, like second, and they they switch first and second, I think, a lot, Finland and Korea. Korea, they have the
You're
required.
talking North Korea, of course.
No.
No.
They have mandatory schooling, and it's like in the morning from like 8 to noon, and kids usually sleep through that, so they can go to their private tutors in the afternoon. These tutors get paid a fortune, and these kids are there to learn. Now they're trying to get out of a situation, being in a poor country, so they have much more motivation than people do here to do better. And there's also a different respect thing from children to adults. I mean, the whole, everything's different, but it's private. Parents pay for it, and they feel like they need to help their kids get ahead, kind of like the immigrants of 100 years ago here, right?
Singapore moms.
Huh?
Singapore moms.
Like, okay.
You know,
Right.
I mean, these moms, they push their kids, and it pays off.
Right. But the thing about making any international comparison that I would caution you against is those are different cultures. They have different ideas about what's right, what's wrong, the importance of the individual versus the importance of society, right? They have different goals. And so a lot of countries say value harmony over individual happiness. Those are going to give you very different results, and they're going to lead to very different ways of doing things. And because one of those scores higher on a test doesn't mean that you'd be willing to adopt that culture and that point of view in order to get that result. Mostly when I hear people talk about other countries, I'm like, I don't really care. It's not my problem. My problem is this country, where we have a certain way of thinking about what it means to have a government and what it means to, under what conditions I can take money from him and give it to him, right? If you want to give up all those and just say, look, it's all everybody's money, and let's just throw it in a big pool and spread it out. I mean, if you want to do that, you might get some very different results. You might actually get worse results, judging from past history. But yeah, I'm more concerned with starting from not who's doing better on what tests, but more from first principles and saying, what is it we are trying to do? We want to have people in a society who can do certain things, right? Who can, hit the low bar, make change in a restaurant, right? But at the high bar, be able to, if employers come in, would they rather have somebody who can actually, you can say, here's a manual that explains how we do things, read it, let me know if you have any questions, and they can actually read it, or somebody who basically is, well, aren't you going to read it for me? Is there a video game I could play? Have you made this fun for me, right? Would you rather have people who have done, who have learned some very, I hate to use the word core, but very central, a set of central foundational fundamental skills and master them? Or would you rather have a bunch of people who have half-assed 40 or 50 different things? Personally, as an employer, I'd rather have a guy that I can teach, that I can say, look, you need to learn this by next week, So, I think we will do better to look at our own situation and our own motivation and our own goals and our own constraints. The game we're trying to play is not the game that Finland is playing, it's not the game that China is playing, it's not the game that Korea is playing. We're playing the game called America. So our job is to do that as well as we can. So.
But
Yeah.
but also to go back, we do not value education. the majority of I'm a former teacher.
Mhm.
So the majority of the people, students and everything, do not value an education. They are not motivated.
I think that's true, and I think that's partly
And
because
especially-
it's something sort of forced on you.
Right.
You're not
And
given
and
the choice,
especially
yeah.
the way it's being presented with Common Core and
Right.
all
Yeah.
of what we're dumbing down our society completely. But I do feel that, we do have to have a sense of bringing our children that, well, I'll use my own example is, when I was dropped off at school, it's the reverse of yours where but this works. When I was dropped off at school, I was told, this is my job. And you're supposed to do well on your job. That was what my father said to me and everything. So, but kids don't get that. And the point with school choice though, and these things, when parents do have to pay, they do get more involved.
sure.
And
absolutely.
some days I used to say, I'd rather, I'll go share this analogy. I was a Title I teacher, and I used to say, I'm going out with my cattle prod, and I'm gonna poke a few kids to learn and get them, because they would say time and time, can't you do it for me? No, I did it. I've gone to school, I've learned. So therefore, but now it's your job to do it. Well, they sparked up and did it. But on the other hand, another thing, I was a Title I teacher. And so certain children wouldn't lose what they had gained in the year. We
Right.
would recommend they go to Sylvan Learning Center. Well, I found out that Sylvan Learning Center, if you pay for that, that's almost a college tuition
Oh, wow.
to go to that. Well, and also it's not local, it's not in the town, so the parents have to take time out of their day to drop the kid off, and they don't let them just drop them off. They have to stay there while they're being tutored. And then so the parent is inconvenienced. Well, I can't tell you how many parents came back the following year. My child progressed tremendously this summer. Why can't you do that?
Because it's free, right? I mean, there's a story I read once about Mercedes-Benz that they were, at some point, they were thinking about lowering their prices, and they lowered their prices and found their sales went down. And then they raised them, and they found the sales went up, which seems counterintuitive, right? You think people want to pay less. But at the higher price, people value them more. They think this is something worth having, right? And if education is something that's free and you have to do it, why would you put a value on it? Why would you think this is important at all? Yes.
No, just to reinforce what you just said, Mercedes actually had a marketing strategy, though, and their advertising was geared heavily to that, is to sell you on why this high price was the best. And then they did a very good job of it.
Yeah.
And they backed it up somewhat. So with a super.
Yeah. They're great cars.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that there was a counterintuitive relationship between prices and demand.
But they did sell it, and just like Harvard
Yeah.
or something, whatever, self-promotional educational institutions sell their high price in bargain. I'd like to ask, just because we have two newly elected state reps here, what their view, we have Dave Close in here and Terry Roy, what their view of the, since money is a floating shell game here that we're dealing with, whether we should have the current property tax funding schools or a sales or income tax.
I came to take in as much information as I could,
What?
and I'm glad to have been able to do that.
No, but I'm asking what's your view on that?
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand, and I came to take in as much information.
Are you saying that
And
you
it's
don't
been
have a-
very appreciative, and I've learned a lot. And
I'm glad
it's
you're
going to take me a good bit of time to put it together and figure out how it influences a whole bunch of different perspectives.
But you haven't given this any thought before then?
Not that I'm going to get into it in any depth here, no.
Well, you're the state rep, that's why I'm asking. You
Thank you.
supposedly you're going to go, there's right now it's in the works.
I appreciate your concern. Thank
Well,
you.
it's more than just appreciating that, I'd like to hear what your opinion is.
I'm not here as a politician.
Well, yes,
I'm
you
here-
are.
I'm here to take in,
I'm sorry, you're a representative of me in Northwood. I'd like to hear your position. You in fact revealed the fact when we were actually running against each other, that, because I didn't run against Mr. Priest, Dr. Corson. So there's the, revealed that you were going to be very communicative with our community.
yeah,
So I'm giving you an opportunity.
I appreciate it. And I gotta think about a whole bunch of different thoughts here. Now's not the time that I'm gonna get into
I
it.
got it, you don't have any. Mr. Roy,
Yes, sir.
do you have a view?
Well, I certainly do not favor an income tax to fund school funding, if that's what your question was, I believe.
Well, I mean, just what you're, yeah, there's three choices that are in the offing, the current property versus sales and...
Well, I think to the presenter's point tonight, we need to look at what we're paying for. I don't hide the fact that I send my kid to a private school. He goes to a Catholic school in Gary, and I pay $5,000 a year, and he scores in the top percentile every year. And if I can get that for $5,000, why do we have to pay that much, triple that at a public school? Yeah, so I just, it's something, and, you know, maybe his model isn't right, maybe it is, but we need to have more of a discussion about what we are teaching versus what we're paying for it. Otherwise, I mean, there's no end to it. I mean, okay, we can't afford the property tax anymore, let's shift it to something else. It's just the same, money's fungible, so, you know,
I just want to throw out, there's more than 2 state reps in the room. Because we got one over here.
Oh, he was
Oh, I'm
hoping
sorry.
that no one was gonna
What-
notice.
What's that?
Sorry,
I wasn't gonna throw you under the bus, Alan.
Would you like to express, I'm glad I know that now, so what would be your preliminary view? I mean, we have a no comment, we have some view there, and now yours.
I tend to think that anything that empowers parents to get more involved in the education of their children, I'm for. So school choice sure seems like the way to go, because that empowers parents with more say in the education of their child, which I think is a positive thing. The fact that we can improve education and save money seems like a pretty compelling argument for school choice. And I have one more question for you, and Harriet, I don't mean to step on you. You mentioned you attended Mr. Valinsky's presentation.
Yes, I did.
Has he reciprocated? And I'd be real curious to know, that Cato graph is really compelling evidence. Has he ever been shown that graph that you're aware of, and how would you respond?
You asked him a question that was related
Yeah, I
to
mean,
it.
I asked him a question and he gave a non-answer, but I didn't have that graph with me blow up, so I couldn't show it to him.
Right.
But, you know, it's sort of, I would like everybody to see it, which is why I'm doing these talks and writing this stuff. And I would like that to be burned into everybody's brain when they say, look, we need more money, this has to go up, this has to go up. Why? It clearly doesn't make a difference.
He's
Why?
giving a
Yeah.
presentation next week.
Yeah. it's-
Yeah,
that's
right.
Go,
So
take this
take
chart
this with it.
and
Take
ask
this
him
with
that
you.
question.
And say, what do you have to say about
And
this?
let us know his answer.
Yeah.
Will do. I think that's next Wednesday at 3.
I think somewhere around there.
Yeah.
He is also going to be in Belmont, and I would like a copy of that because that's next door to where I'm from,
Okay.
and I would like to ask.
Yeah.
You know where to find it.
Yes.
Is that on your website?
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is, there's a whole series of those. There's probably 20 something now, there's 7 more that'll go up and probably another dozen after that. Like I said, they're all very short, they're, you know, one issue. But yeah, I would love it if people would do things like that and go and say, hey, you know what, how come you are spending all this time talking about money and not talking about achievement at all? You know?
I would just throw out, I mean, to anybody you may already be aware of it, there's a site, it's a prolific site called Improve Education.
Okay.
Have you seen that at all? I can't think of the fellow who puts it up there. I think it's a one-man band. It's on YouTube. Well, he has his own website, so.
Is it .com.org?
You know, I think it's org, but I'm not sure. But Improve Education, I almost had his name, let me think of it for you, but, because you put his name in there, it comes up. He writes a lot on his own, but what he does more is aggregate a whole bunch of education studies, articles, opinions worldwide, all kinds of stuff. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, so just to throw this out, I didn't talk about it in this presentation, but people, well, what should we do? What should we do? I mean, one of the things that's about to go up, has everybody seen Tomb Raider? No?
Yeah.
Thank God. Have you? So you remember the triangle of light that if you get it, you can go back in time, right? And I'm like, okay, if you had the triangle of light, you could just go back to 1998 and everything would be a lot less, right? But you'd be getting the same result.
Right.
For a lot less money. So here's the thing, you don't have the triangle of light. At least I don't think any of you has it. But what you have is a filing cabinet, and you could go to the filing cabinet and say, here's what we were doing in 1998. We didn't have these administrators, we didn't have these classroom nannies, we didn't have this, we didn't have that. We did have football, so let's keep that. And you could actually just go back to that and say, we're just going back to what we did in 1998 because it got the same results and it costs about a third as much. Right? And if you need property tax relief, that is the quickest way to get it. Right? It's right there. It's all in black and white. And the reason I mention going back rather than just saying, hey, let's cut our budget back to that number is people have pointed out to me several times that if you do that, you will find superintendents will stand up and say, well, if we're going to cut the budget, we got to get rid of football, we got to get rid of music, we got to get rid of arts. It's like, you know what, if you had that stuff in 1998, you can have it now. Just do it the way you did it then. So you could do that. I mean, in the sense that, it doesn't solve the problem because you were getting crappy results then, you'll get crappy results now at a much smaller price. But what it does is stop the bleeding and buy you some time, right? If you're bleeding, you get the tourniquet on first to stop the bleeding, then you deal with the source of the bleeding. And this is, I would love it if people would present that as an option, right? When they're talking, well, what tax rate should we have, and which towns should be donor towns, and which towns should be recipient towns, and do we need this? It's like, hey, why don't we just go back to 1998? Won't make a difference in achievement. Kids will get the same education they were getting then.
Is it 98 or 78?
98 was the Claremont cases. That was when the Supreme Court waded in.
I think you have some simplistic views. I've been involved since I started with children in school in 1967. And back then, you paid your property tax. You didn't pay it through your mortgage. So people came to the meeting because they got their property tax bill of $5,000, $4,000, whatever. They made sure they were involved in their government and knew what was going on in the school, which was the biggest part. You had a state board of education who gave, through the legislature, building aid. But they didn't say, we'll only pay for the basic school building. So four towns, and I lived in Raymond, built a cement block building at the same time Amherst built this beautiful brick school with an auditorium, with a swimming pool, with tennis courts, and they got 45% building aid and Raymond got 30. So mistakes were made, which are still being made in government, because government thinks they can make one law that will cover everybody, and it won't.
Sure.
The basic thing is, if we were going to give school building aid, the legislature should have said, we'll give for the basic. If you want an auditorium, swimming pool, and tennis courts, your community pays for it. Then we wouldn't say it's not fair, because it was fair. Government too often passes laws because they're trying to socially engineer society.
Sure.
It's all about.
But I mean, so you're saying
back
about
in-
buildings, what I'm saying about content, right?
But back in 1970, when I started selling real estate,
You were born then?
you paid your taxes once a year. December came, and March wasn't too far behind, so you remembered.
Yeah.
Now, people don't even know what they're paying. They don't understand that mortgage payment also contains their tax payment.
My town knows, everybody in my town
No,
knows
we
they're
know.
paying their property
Yeah, we
taxes,
know.
and they get really upset every year.
Because your mortgage goes up.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Now, in
they're
my
great,
town,
too.
they
No,
really
I agree with you.
don't.
If you wanted to have a
Listen.
revolution in the United States, all you would have to do is stop tax withholding.
Yep.
That would be it. You would just say, everybody pay your taxes on April 15th.
Absolutely.
the federal taxes too, all
Right,
of them.
income tax.
Everything would change. So
The
yeah,
reason
I
they
agree
want
with you.
income taxes is because people don't see the little chip
That's
taken
right.
every week.
That's right.
If you make them pay a big amount, then they know when they're
Absolutely.
looking at their
I
government.
mean, that's part of it. Some people would also argue, and I tend to agree with them, that every time you funnel something through the state, it gives the state more power. Right? If they're giving you the money, then you have to jump to their tune. They tell you what to do, you gotta
Back
do it.
in
They put
91 or 92, I got very involved because they were going to take Goals 2000, which had a social engineering to it.
Okay.
And so I said, I want to see the grant you wrote and what it gets us. The State Department of Education took 10% for administering. The SAU took 10% for administering, and then the school took 10%. So 30% of what the federal government gave in Goals 2000. And still to this day, that's the formula. Any grant is a contract, by the way. It's never a grant.
Okay.
Because if you look at that grant, the last page, 2 pages say, for this, you will have a 55 mile an hour speed limit.
Yes,
You will
absolutely.
wear helmets,
That's
you
right.
will do this, you will. And in the Goals 2000, there was 2 pages of what we had to do for that money. Fought it like hell. And Ovid Lamontagne, who everybody thought was so great, was State Board of Education chairman. So he told the commissioner, go and see if each town can get it individually because we're getting so much pushback at the state level. And he let people go from the towns to get that grant, and the people in the towns didn't realize that's money coming in, but just like the grant saying, we'll give you this much money and you can hire 3 policemen, we'll pay the first year, next year we'll pay for 2, and the next year we'll pay for 1. But you've still got those 3 policemen
But
out
notice
there.
what we're doing here. We're talking about money, right? It's not about money.
Yeah.
You could get along without those grants, and if you took the right, if you got the parents to motivate the kids and you got the kids to motivate themselves, you wouldn't need the money. You keep thinking, oh, we need that money because it'll somehow make things better, but it won't. It never does. It never has. So, but if we can get you focused on money, if, you know, the commissioner go, oh, here's a grant, here's some money you can get this, you can get that, then everybody's talking about money. And they're worried about, well, that town spent more than this town and they got reimbursed more than we did. Do you really need more than a cement building to teach kids how to read and write and do arithmetic and do algebra and do statistics and learn logic? Do you? I don't think you do. Do you need an auditorium for that? No, not really. Do you need a basketball court? No, you don't. Do you need a baseball or football field? No, you don't. And in fact, if I were in one of those towns, even though I'd be like, woohoo, we got all this extra money from the state, stuck it to those guys, I'd be, if I was one of the other, I would be one of the people going, why do we need an auditorium? If the town wants to build an auditorium, let's build an auditorium. It has nothing to do with the school. If the town wants a swimming pool, it has nothing to do with education, right? But everybody gets caught up on money. Everybody thinks fairness is about money. And if there's one thing I hope people take away from this, and one message that I would like to spread, and I hope you'll go out and help me spread it, money is not the issue. Money is not the issue, and if we make it the issue, we will never find out what the actual issue is.
The only thing
Oh,
you're
well, actually,
missing
you were first. Sorry.
on that point is every 10% is somebody's job or plural jobs.
Yeah.
They're gonna fight you to hell to keep their
Yeah.
jobs.
So getting the word
That's
out,
it.
I think is really, and I'll get to my point in just a second, but last Tuesday, at the select board here in Northwood meeting, they had an open hearing, and the select board admitted that they had broken the law over and over. They also admitted that they didn't follow their own town laws in bidding. And so I got home that night, and my wife said, "How'd it go?" And I said, "Well, they admitted it all." And she didn't believe me, really. You know, she thought I was, as usual, giving her some BS. But the next afternoon, when I come home, she's watching that on YouTube. And absolutely found out that what I said was true. My point to you is, how do we get your presentation, which I appreciate very much, on YouTube?
Skip?
Sorry,
Hi, Skip.
Hi there.
that's why he's here, to get this on
Okay.
YouTube.
And we have it
I'm just
all.
wondering that.
Yeah, and there are other, the testimony I gave at conferences on YouTube, and as much as possible, these
You
are
can cut this
going up.
part out of that?
Right.
Yes, just
No.
Okay. No, and it's one of the.
That would violate my
technology,
rule.
exactly.
And like Valinsky can go and
Politics,
ask the
internal.
school district, "Hey, would you like to invite me?" And they're like, "Oh, you have money for us?" Sure. And if I ask them the same thing, they're like, I get no response. We're like, we don't really want to hear that, right? But there is YouTube, there is the internet, there is this site. There are lots of ways now to get messages out that didn't exist
Right.
10 years ago.
You
Thank
can
you.
send a video to whatever town cable network is,
Sure.
and they will put it on and play it 5 or 6 times in a week.
That's an excellent thing to know. Thank you. I did not know that. But yeah, so this is, but yeah.
All it
any-
is a CD to the mail
Okay.
to.
Cool.
Or a thumb drive, or electronic.
Is
All
it
right.
still in Belmont that they have the cable for Atlantic now? It was MetroCast.
The public access studio is in Laconia, at the Laconia High School.
I mean, to further that answer too, I'll go anywhere and talk to anybody about this. So if you can get a bunch of people together, I'm happy.
Have you given any thought to how, even to begin the conversation, how to implement something like this? Given the enormities and complexities of the education machine and the money behind it,
Yes.
you cannot compete with Bill and Melinda Gates. So how do we break through that to even have the conversation without being
Well,
shut?
that's exactly what I phrased everything this way. I don't think anything can change until the reflex reaction that people have when they think about fairness stops being about money. Now, there's a lot of, I am a small fish in a big pond. I am hoping that people will help and make it a bigger pond, right? I am hoping that technology will continue to make those disparities in resources less relevant. A lot of the stuff that I do, the talks I give on education or whatever, there's something that Milton Friedman said that really struck me once. And he said, he's writing down all these ideas and people are like, do you think this is going to change anything? He's like, it's not going to change anything now, but at some point what is now politically impossible becomes politically inevitable. And when things are in that situation and everything's falling apart, people will be scrambling around looking for ideas. So I don't actually expect there to be some gradual march that people are going to go, oh my God, you're right, and we should start doing this. I actually think the whole system's going to implode because it has to. Okay, and at that point, you're going to have towns that are just going to be in open revolt and say, you know what, I actually don't care what the state mandates are. We're not even going to take your money. We're going to do it ourselves. How should we do it? And I'm hoping at that point that there will be enough people who will say, well, here's a way we could do it. Why don't we try this? Okay? That's about the best I can hope for, unless, the Koch brothers get interested, right? If anybody knows them.
I know who knows them.
Okay.
I just wanted to add on to what you said, Representative. With the 3 representatives here, there's a term called preference cascade. And it really depends on the idea that sort of what you expressed, which is, well, it's so big, it'll never happen. Well, preference cascade comes down to that instant in time when everybody starts to realize, hey, I'm not the only one that's thinking of this.
Right.
And all of a sudden, what was seen to be impenetrable falls apart and collapses. And it's really up to folks, well, the folks in this room, folks outside of this room, but it really depends a lot on the folks, like the three of you representatives here tonight, to say, I need to talk about this in the halls of power. And just like Ian said, it's not going to happen right away. It might not even happen in 10 years. But if people keep talking about it, if people keep on believing that what's going on right now in the educational sphere isn't working, sooner or later there hopefully would be a breakthrough to say, is there a better way than the old 1880, 1890 warehouse factory form of education?
I think it's actually starting at the grassroots. I think they've reached, society's reached a maximum saturation as far as how much they can pay. And people are actually starting to look at their, I mean, my mortgage went up, and I'm like, why is this isn't what I budgeted for? Well, where's it going? Well, 75% is going to the school. Why are we paying that much still? So I think it's starting to happen.
Gonna have to get your yellow jacket on.
Yeah, I mean, a couple days ago, I gave a talk in Dover. And one of the things that I was saying I was hopeful about was this, that if you go back 20 years ago, the people who were sick and tired of the way the government managed food started changing things, right? They started saying, look, we need farmers markets, we need to actually convince people that they can raise their own food, they can butcher their own animals, they can cook their own food, they can do all the stuff that they can form cooperatives, they can get together and do things that seemed impossible because everything was very regimented and controlled. We're about 20 years behind that. But the talk I was giving was basically, we should be looking at what people did to start reclaiming food and be doing that to reclaim education. And it is all grassroots. It's all, people like Joel Salatin going out and saying, you're going to maybe pay more for smaller things of better quantity. But that's what I'm talking about here.
But it's Catholic school.
Right. Or Catholic school. It's like, except in that case you're paying less for something of more quality, right?
Yeah.
But the first thing that has to happen there is they have to become aware that there is a difference. And that they have a choice, right? Not necessarily school choice, like, okay, instead of this school I go to that school, but choices in the way that their kids can do things, the resources they can get, the way they can cooperate with the people in their neighborhoods, or just the people who agree with them, who don't happen to live near them, but they're connected, online. So that makes me hopeful, because food has come a long way, and I'm aware of it because we're involved in a farm, and it's unbelievable the amount of BS that you have to wade through, and how much better that's become. Even in 10 years since I've lived here, it's become better, right? So there is hope. It's a slow process. It is a grassroots process. Nobody's going to sweep in and say, here's $1 billion in, spread your
Well, I want to talk about it, and when people can say, well, okay, well, how do you do it? Well, I guess keep talking.
Just to say, look, suppose there were enough money, right? So this is one of the problem solving techniques you need. Suppose we had enough money, great. What should we be doing with it, right? And we can also then stop and say, so there's this person over here, she's on a fixed income, she basically has to eat dog food 3 times a month because she's paying for that guy who makes $200,000 a year to send his kids to the school where they have the auditorium and the swimming pool, and he's taking advantage of it. Why? Why is that happening? What's the justification for that? Because if you can go back to those kinds of principles, it's a very different discussion than like, oh, well, we're a rich town. We should be, well, that person's not rich.
Yeah.
That person is suffering and sitting there going, I feel powerless. Well, what am I supposed to do? The parents get together, the PTO gets together, and they're taking my money and they're doing, why am I paying for that? It's one thing for me to say, I want every kid to be able to read and write. I would love it if every kid could identify, just to take an example, a Ponzi scheme when they see it, right? Okay, but French, tuba, why am I paying for this? And if I have a ton of money and I don't care, great. If I live in Wolfboro or something, and I got money, I'm dripping money, great, take my money, that's fine. Which, there's a town near Sunapee which seems to be like that. They just don't seem to care. Oh, we have a perfectly good library, let's build another one. What the hell? Nobody seems to mind. Okay,
Because some of the people in town mind.
Some of the people in town who are not the rich people, they're not the people who live on the lake, and they're like, why are you doing this to
Well,
me?
this is
I like
what
your
you're
shift
dealing
in,
with.
the shift away from the money is the emphasis and the focal point. And you made a number of, I think, very good points. But I see at work here, this Valinsky, I haven't heard him, I know what he's talking about. This get away from the property tax, and because you're talking money. We have a couple of individuals, in fact, vociferously here in town, back in this election and before, writing letters to the editor about, our property taxes are terrible. Now, these are the very people, by the way, who vote for everything in sight. And the opportunity presents itself, not just the schools. But having said that, there is this, and it has to be the progressive mindset, but there's a couple of others that describe that, but where government's the solution, we're going to spend money, and that's just the matter, where do we come up with the money, because government's going to solve the problem. Well, they're running out of money at the property tax level. That's not, now these people are griping about the property taxes. So what they're going to do by the sales tax or the income tax is put it into what is, some people were talking about it in various ways here, but an invisible taxing source. It's whether your Social Security or your income tax is taken out in little increments, so you don't notice it. If you had to pay it all on April 15th,
Right.
you really notice it. Same with the property tax. It comes in big chunks. You notice it if it's sitting in your mortgage. It's not really, most people I think know that it's in that mortgage. But
They know it's there, Joe, but they don't think of it as
That's true.
they
It takes
would
it out of
if
their
they
mind.
They don't feel
It
it's
takes it-
$5,000.
there's no doubt.
Yeah.
That's right. There's no doubt. It takes it out of your mind, and that's what sales tax does, and that's what income tax does at the state level. Sales tax is very insidious because it just creeps into everything. So they're shifting over to that to dodge the bullet here, and the bullet is the collapse that's coming in this entire house of cards of what's called education, and isn't. But and I think, but. So they're busy while you're, I mean, they're not addressing these very problems, and I like the fact you're.
Why would they?
Yeah.
It's good money for them.
Yeah.
So they're going around it though with another way to pay for it.
How
Exactly.
many of you know the history of Valinsky suing the state of New Hampshire?
I'm familiar with a
Gene
little of it,
Shaheen was the governor. Gene Shaheen appointed Philip McLaughlin as Attorney General. For 10 years, Leslie Lutke, an Attorney General, had fought all of the school funding cases and won. When Philip McLaughlin came in as Attorney General, he told Leslie he was going to argue before the Supreme Court the Claremont case. Andrew Valinsky was an attorney with Gene Shaheen's husband. So there's your history. She put the person in that would lose the argument, and that's how we got Claremont. You
Yeah.
also had two judges, Batchelor and Berman. I can't remember the two names, but both of them said, now we've made the decision that will make them get an income tax. Unfortunately, they've been wrong so far. I think personally, the fact that we've gone to paying for charter schools is what is starting to bring forth what you're saying, the quality of the education is getting to the people whose kids play with kids that go to charter schools, and they say, how come my kid doesn't know this? How come? And once they begin to be jealous because their kid doesn't have the same as the kid at the charter school, they'll start demanding it of the public school.
That's one thing that might happen. Another thing that might happen is people who want the income tax will actually start putting more and more regulations on charter schools so that they become unable to function.
Well, they're
Well,
trying.
they're
Keep on doing
they're
it.
That
already
is
doing
that is an
that,
argument
yeah.
people have against charter
Well,
schools
they're-
is the money comes from the state, and so
There's bills right now to increase the the licensure.
Yeah,
and
right.
all kinds of things. They want to legislate
So,
about existing.
I mean, and this is what makes it difficult, right? There is a game, there are high stakes players, there are people who have all kinds of influence, all kinds of money, all kinds of connections. That's what you're up against, right? So you can't necessarily fight that effectively. What you can try to do is present ideas that will take root in people's heads and they'll think about it and start, it's something like this. It might be that somebody sees the Cato chart and, at first they're like, wow, that's amazing. And then they start seeing these discussions and going, but that really isn't going to help. Wait, that's really not going to help. And eventually it spreads, right? But that you're fighting in the court of public opinion. This is not something that's going to be won in the legislature, in the courtroom. I mean, I personally am so unenthusiastic about anything that happens in court because of this particular, the Claremont decision. I don't know if people are familiar, everybody familiar with Article 83 in the Constitution, right? So what it says is that free and fair competition in the trades is an inherent and essential right of the people. Inherent and essential. And that it is the job of the state to protect people from monopolies, which tend to hinder that. Okay? It also says that the legislature and the court shall cherish seminaries and public schools. So the Supreme Court looks at this and goes, well, what this actually means is that the state should set up a monopoly to control public schools but not seminaries. Okay, it's literally 180 degrees from what it says. There's what it says, and there's what the court says. And so people start to talk about the constitutionally mandated responsibility, blah, 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 and it's not constitutionally mandated, it's court mandated. And this goes so deep because people are conditioned to believe that whatever the court says must be true. This is actually, Jody mentioned I asked Valinsky a question, and the question I asked him was, is there any decision that a court could make that so twists the English language? Could they just say blue is green? And at what point would a legislature be able to say, you know what? You don't get to say that. And his answer was, oh, well, that was settled in the 1790s, by which he meant 1803, Marbury versus Madison, where John Marshall basically said, oh, the Constitution is whatever we say it is. Okay? And if the Constitution is literally whatever they say it is, then the written document matters not at all. You cannot know by picking up that document. You know nothing. It tells you nothing. Okay? It's sort of a suggestion. It sort of hits on some things, but the courts are not bound by that at all. And if the courts tell the legislature to do something that is completely contradicted by that, then the legislature isn't bound by it, and the governor isn't bound by it. Nobody's bound by it. We literally are in this situation where nobody knows what the law is until you go to a court and say yes or no.